Hello, I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and this is my review of the first season of the Fallout series. On my first viewing, I thought the show was flawed, but great overall. After some closer examination, I still enjoy the show, but it's more flawed than I thought. The rapid-fire version of my review is this. The production design is some of the best I've ever seen, the acting is generally good, the writing has problems. Before moving ahead, I think it's obvious, but just to be safe, there are major spoilers ahead for the show. I'll almost always recommend watching a show and getting a feel for it yourself before taking someone else's opinion. The rest of this video will serve as a review of the season, but will also detail the new elements the show adds to the lore and give a rundown of the characters before closing with my hopes for season 2. Note that I will include information gleaned from Amazon Extras, 7 short videos hosted by Bud Askins. If you haven't seen them, I highly recommend watching them. They're full of some great dark humor and lore information. With that said, let's get started. As there's some strong criticism coming, I want to start with what I thought the show did well. First of all, the sets were generally great. Running chronologically, let's start with the Spencer house, where Cooper Howard was performing as a cowboy for a kid's birthday. I enjoyed the architecture, the landscaping, and the excellent vista of the Los Angeles skyline, which gave us a front row seat on the apocalypse. Second, the vault sets looked great too. I'm sure there are those who prefer the older style vaults in 3 and New Vegas, but I'm a fan of the new tile sets from 4 and 76, and these vaults replicated those. I like the residences and atria of 4, 32, and 33, and really like the crop fields of the latter two. The cryo storage section of 31 looks good as well. Third, I thought Philly was a bit of a mixed copy of Megaton in Fallout 3 and Diamond City in Fallout 4, but I still liked it. Fourth, I enjoyed the Griffith Observatory Planetarium serving as Moldaver's lair. Moldaver's feast-laden table, the vista of the ruined LA skyline and billowing NCR flag, the equipment, the cage in which they held Hank McClane, all work together well to create a space that feels appropriate to an endgame location. Besides these sets, there are some amazing on-location shots in the show. Let's start with all the shots in Namibia. If you're unaware of Namibia, it's a country in southwestern Africa. Overlooked by most of the other European powers because of its incredibly arid environment, it was colonized by the German Empire in the late 19th century. Though the Germans lost the colony in the First World War, there are still a lot of German place names, which is how we get Kohlmannskop and its Krankenhaus, the site of the West Side Clinic and the snake oil salesman's office. In September 1909, the Edward Bolen ran aground on Namibia's Skeleton Coast. Over the ensuing century, the coastline moved significantly, and today the wreck is a quarter mile from the ocean. This was the ship that Lucy found on her trek from Vault 33 to Philly. Sometime in the late 1920s, when Namibia was under South African control, the town of Elizabeth's Bay was founded to mine the same diamonds as Kohlmannskop. Elizabeth's Bay was the site where Maximus stopped the farmer from killing the snake oil salesman. Second, we have the filming that took place in Utah. Primarily, we're looking at the Flatlands Brotherhood compound at Wendover Airport in Wendover, Utah. The Air Force base on site closed in 1969. Along with that, the Bonneville Salt Flats served as the background for the vertibirds flying towards the LA basin. Third, the Super Duper Mart looked great. The exterior at the very least was a dressed up real world site. I'm not sure about the interior, but I wouldn't be surprised if it were really inside or was a set. Lastly, the Red Rocket Station, another dressed up real world location, looked just about perfect. That being said, I also thought that the music was quite well done. Let's start with licensed music. The show opened with Cooper Howard performing rope tricks to Orange Colored Sky just before the world ended. We were introduced to Dr. Siggy Wilzig's dismal life with Into Each Life Some Rain Must Fall. Lucy's adventure really started with I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire. As she sat alone that night, the Ink Spots performed Maybe. Ladyfingers played as Lucy and Maximus raised their hands to cross the bridge in their standoff with the Fiends. What a Difference a Day made perfectly fit this sudden reveal of Vault 32's overnight restoration. I Don't Want to See Tomorrow played as Maximus stormed the Griffith Observatory as he fought alongside the Brotherhood to get to Lucy. Lastly, We Three played as the 3 main characters dealt with the outcome of the battle for the observatory. Along with that, the scored music was well done, especially in the last episode. Let's move on to costume work. The pre-war clothes were all well done, and felt like they fit the retro future setting. Cooper Howard's 50s movie cowboy attire was great, as was his proper Western attire as the Ghoul. The Brotherhood uniforms looked great, from the basic military attire of the aspirants, to the robes of the cleric, to the heavily pocketed uniforms of the squires, to the form-fitting under armor of the knights. The vault suits looked great, as did the specialty vault gear like the chaplain's outfit and the security staff equipment. Wastelander outfits looked appropriately post-apocalyptic, closer to concept art than the basic Wastelander gear we see in-game. Lastly, the uniforms of the New California Republic looked great, from the ranger armor worn by the lead farmers to the combat gear of the guards at the Griffith Observatory. Obviously this is makeup and not costume, but the ghoul makeup, especially Walton Goggins' makeup as the ghoul, is great. Next, let's talk about the props. First, we saw several magazines in the show. Specifically, there were multiple copies of the Wasteland Survival Guide, and Cooper Howard read a copy of Tesla Science magazine. Second, Stimpaks both looked right, and the one Lucy used worked appropriately. Third, many of the processed foods of the Fallout universe made an appearance and looked great. We saw Cram, Blamco mac and cheese, sugar bombs, Fancy Lad snack cakes, and even Yum Yum deviled eggs. Fourth, the guns looked great. We saw 10mm pistols, assault rifles, junk jets, a laser pistol and laser rifles, miniguns, and pipe rifles. There were even some new guns like the Vault submachine gun and the Vault trank gun. Fifth, the vehicles we saw looked great, from Bud Askin's Fusion Flea to the Brotherhood of Steel's Vertibirds and to the Pridwin. Sixth, while I had some issues with power armor, generally speaking I thought it looked great and the actors wearing it moved appropriately. Seventh, the show did a great job with the Pip-Boys, both in appearance and in function. While the Geiger counter wasn't quite right, and they clearly used the same rad level for multiple radiation sources, overall I appreciated the graphics too. Eighth, the robots looked great. Mostly here we just saw Mr. Handies, but there was also an Assaultron buried in the desert. Ninth, while I had problems with the water chip scene, which I'll talk about later, I thought the water chip looked great. Not a one-to-one replica, but great regardless. Next, let's talk about the cultural aspects. First, I thought the anti-communist elements of American culture in the Fallout universe were properly shown, with Cooper Howard being referred to as a pinko, and Cooper Howard himself calling communism a political ideology that ends in breadlines. Second, it was great to see that westerns were such a popular movie genre. The culture of the Fallout universe in the 2070s was similar to mid-century American culture in which westerns were hugely popular. We saw Cooper Howard, a cowboy who became a movie star, thanks to his starring in The Man from Dead Horse, The Man from Calabasas, A Man and His Dog, and Gun. Third, I thought it was cool that we got to see an animated Grognak and the Ruby Ruins cartoon on TV. Previously, that title was reserved only for a holotape video game, but we saw here that there was a cartoon for the story as well. Lastly, I liked seeing the Vault Dweller attitudes toward the Raiders, specifically that they naively wanted to teach them calculus, philosophy, Shakespeare, and Marlowe. Okay, hopefully that list of things I enjoyed in the show tells you I did like the show. When I tell you all the issues that I had with the show, know that I call these things out because I think the show was good, and that with some work, it could be great. We'll start with what is really my only issue with production design: the death of the captured raiders. In episode 7, the captured raiders from the Triennial Trade Raid of 2297 were supposedly killed by rat poison. If this is true, and I don't have any reason to believe that it isn't, the dead raiders are missing half the symptoms. Rat poison is typically based in the blood thinner Coumadin. While the corpses looked pale, which is one of the symptoms of a Coumadin overdose, none of the other telltale symptoms were present. Some symptoms such as fatigue and dizziness require the afflicted to be alive to be observed. That said, the body should have shown signs of bruising and bleeding such as nosebleeds and bleeding gums, and the vomit should have been dark instead of white. While most shows would shy away from such things, the rest of the show is quite graphic at times, so this feels like a miss. Next, let's talk about the most significant lore-breaking items. First, the end of the world came at the wrong time of day. The bombs hit the DC area at 9:47 a.m., 6:47 a.m. Pacific, and they fell in waves across the country, so the first bombs hit the West Coast earlier than that. They clearly changed the time for the purposes of the scene. I thought the scene we got from this was great, but I don't like that they did this, and I do wonder which time we're supposed to take as canonical. I believe this was done following the rule of cool, where a rule or lore is broken in a minor way to facilitate cool scenes. I'm going to continue with the assumption that the bombs fell on the morning of Saturday, October 23rd, 2077, early morning on the West Coast, as that is referenced by many sources. Second, while there are many scenes in which the power armor functions as usual, there are also several points in the show that show the effect of the popularity of Iron Man. Specifically, we see that the visor of the T-60 helmet now opens, and that there are wrist jets that allow the suits to fly. Helmets have never opened like this before, and it creates an obvious weak point in the armor. As for the wrist jets, the only jets prior to this were bulky jetpacks attached to the power armor like a backpack. I have trouble believing that these two little jets could lift and propel the weight of the armor. There are a couple of changes to the armor that I do like, but I'll leave those for a point about tech updates as I thought they were good changes. Third, the fall of Shady Sands. I've covered this to some extent before, but there are a lot of issues with Shady Sands in the Fallout show, so I'm going to cover them all here. First, the location. In 2161, at the time of the first Fallout, Shady Sands was a tiny town in the Mojave Desert located between Vaults 13 and 15. The community was composed of descendants of dwellers from Vault 15, and the town was headed by Aradesh. By 2241, the time of Fallout 2, Shady Sands was the capital of the New California Republic, and Aradesh's daughter Tandy was the president. The location of Shady Sands on the map changed slightly from Fallout to Fallout 2, moving west, as did the locations of Vault 13 and 15. I could be wrong, but I think this was done to shrink the map horizontally rather than as a means to change the canonical location. As I said before, Shady Sands was in the Mojave Desert, not the Mojave Wasteland which lies east of there in Nevada, but in the desert just east of the Sierra Nevada mountains. In the Fallout TV show, Shady Sands has moved about 100 miles south into the LA basin. The only reason I can see that Shady Sands was moved to LA was because it would be in the right place for Maximus and Lucy to stumble across the crater as they tracked Thaddeus. There are those who say the location doesn't matter, but it does because it absolutely mattered to the plot of the first Fallout. If Shady Sands had been in the LA basin, it absolutely would have been overrun by the Master in 2161. Vault 4 probably would have been too. Anyway though, there was already an NCR settlement in the region, Angel's Boneyard, the site where the NCR printed their money. Next, the appearance of the city. I'm not talking about the ruined skyscrapers that shouldn't be there but are because of the city's location, I'm talking about the well and obelisk. In Lucy's flashback, we see an image of the Shady Sands courthouse, and in front of it, an obelisk and a well. While these might seem like Easter eggs for the long-term fans of Fallout, they shouldn't be there. While these two objects could be found in Shady Sands and Fallout, they were gone by Fallout 2. The streetcars shouldn't be there either, but I'm chalking that up to the location being wrong. Given the change of scenery, I don't begrudge the person who came up with the streetcars, as if Shady Sands had existed in the area, the streetcars would have made sense. Regardless, on to the main event. The biggest lore screw-up of the show, the fall of Shady Sands. In the days following the release of the Fallout show, there was a significant uproar from the Fallout community over one image more than any other. The chalkboard in Vault 4 that shows an image of a mushroom cloud beside the words 2277, the fall of Shady Sands. The problem with this is that Shady Sands could not have been destroyed in 2277. In 2282, at the time of Fallout New Vegas, Shady Sands was still the capital of the New California Republic forces fighting to annex the Mojave Wasteland. Like many others, though a fan of the show, I knew that this needed to be addressed as quickly as possible by Bethesda or the showrunners themselves, as it effectively made Fallout New Vegas non-canonical. While I love all of the canonical Fallout games, there is a faction within the fanbase that hates all things Bethesda, and I knew they would jump on this to trash Bethesda, and honestly, rightly so in this case. There were fans of the show who defended it, saying things like, it's referring to the start of the fall of Shady Sands, like the fall of the Roman Empire. It's an era of decline, not a year that it was destroyed. The problem is that it was clearly the case that 2277 was intended by the showrunners to be the year that Shady Sands was bombed. I'm not basing this off an interpretation of a single image, this is from 3 separate points of data within the show. We'll call the chalkboard Exhibit A. Exhibit B comes from the credits in Episode 5. In this sequence, we see a locker at the Shady Sands Elementary School that has a book in it checked out from the Shady Sands Library. This book shows that the last time it was checked out was in November 2276, implying that the city was destroyed before it could be returned. Lastly, Exhibit C comes from the words of Lucy McLean in Episode 4. As she attempts to dissuade the ghoul from cannibalism, she says, "You know, my vault endured hardship too. In the Great Plague of 77, everyone had to quarantine. They couldn't work the farms together. People starved, my mother included." By itself, Exhibit C might not seem like much, but let's view it in the context of these 5 sub-exhibits. Exhibit Alpha. Rose McLean fled the vault with her children. Exhibit Beta. Hank McLean left the vault to go after them. Exhibit Gamma. In 2297, the dwellers of Vault 33 didn't know that the door had ever been opened. Exhibit Delta. Rose was ghoulified when Shady Sands was nuked. And Exhibit Epsilon. Betty Pearson told Norm McLean that she and Hank buried Rose McLean. These 5 sub-exhibits tell a story. In 2277, Rose McLean fled the vault with the McLean children. Hank McLean wanted his children back, both because they were his kids and because his family couldn't be gone without explanation. He and Betty Pearson, both a fellow Bud's Bud and the former overseer, concocted a fake plague that allowed them to lock the dwellers in their quarters. Without any witnesses, Hank left the vault in Betty's hands and chased his family to Shady Sands. When Rose refused to come home, Hank took his children and fled. nuking the city as he went. As a side note here, I don't know how he did this. As stated elsewhere, I hope that the automated silos of Appalachia play a role, but I really don't know how Hank called a nuke down regardless. Anyway, Hank returned home with his kids and ended the quarantine of the Great Plague of 77. He explained his wife's disappearance was due to death by starvation, the same fate that actually befell a few dwellers. Combining exhibits A, B, and C, it's clear that the showrunners intended the city of Shady Sands to have been nuked in 2277, a complete violation of the canonical lore timeline. In the days after the show was released, Bethesda came out to assure the public that Fallout New Vegas was indeed still canonical, and thus we have to go with the 2277 was the start of a period of decline theory of events. This works to an extent, as 2277 was the year of the first Battle of the Hoover Dam, and the NCR invested more and more resources into the war effort in the Mojave after that point. Even if we assume that this is the case with Exhibit A, that still leaves exhibits B and C out there, pointing to the 2277 date. You can try to explain these away by saying something like, the student just didn't return the book when they were supposed to, and Lucy was just wrong about the date. But if you keep making clues completely unreliable, there's no point in putting the clues in the show, or in making reasoned conclusions based on what we see and hear, unless it's explicitly given to us as exposition. It's clear that the original intention of the showrunners was to have the bomb fall on Shady Sands in 2277. That covers what I consider to be the biggest lore mistakes, so let's get into poor choices in writing from least bad to quite bad. First, this is a pretty minor problem, and I don't even know if the writers are to blame for this, but there's no use of energy weapons in the show. I didn't even realize this until I was considering that I liked the appearance of the laser rifle held by the Enclave Guard and the laser pistol held by Moldaver. It's an odd choice, especially as the Brotherhood of Steel was a prominent faction. Hopefully we'll see energy weapons make a proper appearance in Season 2. Second, the People's Republic of China, the chief enemy of the United States in the Sino-American War, is never mentioned once. The TV announcer at the start of the first episode talks about America's adversaries. There's a Capital Post headline reading Reds losing territory, more troops deployed to Far East. Neither of these are specific to China. Combine this with the crashed USSR satellite in episode 2, and I'd bet that no one new to the Fallout franchise would even know that China is the prime adversary of the United States. I should note that there being a Soviet satellite isn't itself an issue. The Soviet Union didn't collapse in the Fallout universe as it did in the real world. But I couldn't help but notice the complete absence of anything China-related. I didn't appreciate this for two reasons. One, because it will likely create misconceptions for those new to the Fallout universe, and two, because it was likely done for business reasons instead of artistic ones, i.e., it wasn't done to aid the show, but to avoid harming relations between Amazon and the real-world People's Republic of China. It's one of those dark ironies that capitalists of the real world are so friendly with the dictatorial regime of Communist China that we can't have Communist China portrayed as an enemy in fiction anymore. Third, the representation of the character Dane. The Brotherhood has an explicit history of being anti-gay as of Fallout New Vegas because of their need for members to reproduce. Dane is played by trans man Zelia Mendez-Jones. The show should have either A, treated the actor as male and had the Brotherhood treat Dane as male, using male pronouns as Mendez-Jones does in real life, or B, if they wanted to have a character use they-them pronouns like the Brotherhood used when referring to Dane, the showrunners should have had the actor play a trans character in a faction that doesn't have a known history that precludes an openly trans member. I liked Dane's character and thought that Mendez-Jones did a good job portraying Dane. My problem is with the character not conforming to known behavior by the Brotherhood. Fourth, there is no mention of what the Enclave is. The audience is told that Dr. Siggy Wilzig escaped the Enclave, but there's nothing that tells the audience about the nature of the Enclave. Unless the viewer is already familiar with the universe, they will have no concept of the Enclave aside from the setting of the Enclave base from which Dr. Wilzig escapes. There's not even any Enclave symbolism in the base. Fifth, the broken water chip. It's brought up at the Vault meeting in episode 3, but outside of the Overseer election, it's never mentioned again. I have to assume it's a plot point for season 2, but even so, there are problems. A, I have to ask why this vault wouldn't have a dozen water chips in reserve, given that it was meant to operate basically forever. B, I think we have to assume that the water chip is working in Vault 32, or it would have been mentioned. Why would Betty close the vaults off from each other if 32 could temporarily fix the problem for 33? Sixth, the failure of Vault 32. There are multiple problems here. To really discuss this properly, we first need to talk about everything we know about the 31, 32, 33 vault cluster. Let's start with how the dwellers of 33 perceive their home. They believe that the vaults are 3 democracies and 3 vaults, separated to prevent the spread of threats, but connected to aid one another in times of need, as stated by Betty Pearson in episode 5. They live in a meritocracy where people pride themselves on doing the right thing, as stated by Dr. Siggy Wilzig in episode 2. They believe the surface isn't safe for human life, with Hank McClane telling them in episode 1, "Soon, if our measurements are correct, radiation levels on the surface are dropping fast enough that the next generation will be able to recolonize." They believe the entire purpose of their vault, to paraphrase Lucy McClane in episode 5, is to come up to the surface one day and restart civilization. Lastly, they seem to be vaguely aware that their overseers always come from Vault 31, but they excuse this because, as Chet says in episode 5, Vault 31 has more resources, a better education system. They also justify leaders from Vault 31 repeatedly winning their overseer elections thanks to the slogan, "When things look glum, vote 31." Next, let's talk about the development of the Vault cluster. From Barb Howard in episode 8, we know that the idea for the Vault was conceived by Bud Askins. Askins views time as the greatest weapon against rivals and the brevity of the human lifespan as the greatest obstacle to human achievement. Vault 31 is built to house Bud's buds so that they can be periodically released to govern the vaults until the day comes for Vault Tech to claim the surface and build a new humanity. He refers to the denizens of Vault 32 and 33 as a breeding pool, genetically selected to breed with my buds to create a class of super managers. He conceived of these vaults as a means of creating an everlasting, self-perpetuating civilization managed by his buds. As Askins tells Cooper Howard in episode 6, in his view, the future of humanity comes down to one word: management. With all that said, as far as we know, Vaults 32 and 33 were effectively identical. The main difference appears to be that while the main produce of Vault 33 is corn, the main produce of Vault 32 was wheat. I would also be willing to bet that based on the main crop produced, that while Vault 33's crop field has a backdrop of Nebraska farmland, that Vault 32's backdrop is that of Kansas farmland. So, if they're so similar, why did 32 fail while 33 shows no signs of a problem? In the exploration by Norm and Chet in episodes 4 and 5, we see a message written on the wall of the corridor that says, "We know the truth." Another message on the wall of the Overseer's office that says, "Death to management." And one more message on the wall next to the door of Vault 31 that says, "We know what's in there." We see the corpses of dwellers that indicated that some murdered each other and that many took their own lives. Lastly, we see that one of the dwellers was watching a video on the Mouse Utopia experiments when he stuck a utensil into an electric toaster. The Mouse Utopia video is actually the biggest clue as to what happened. It's an excerpt from a Bud's Buds recruitment film, one of the Amazon extras that can be found in the Amazon Prime Explore tab for the Fallout show. Unless you watched those extras, as I did weeks after the show launched, you wouldn't know that the video being watched in the vault is actually a clue as to what went wrong with 32. I'm of the opinion that necessary context like this should have been provided in the show itself, not an extra. While this bugged me, it's not the biggest problem. Let's consider what the other clues mean. We know the truth is pretty plain. As is, we know what's in there. Somehow the dwellers became aware of Bud's buds and the fact that Vault 31 was full of them. The death to management message on the wall of the Overseer's office is clearly a reference to Bud Askins' view that management is the key to the future of humanity, and his buds are that management. The fact that they had Overseer Ian Jackson tied up means that they probably interrogated him as well. This would explain how they knew what they did, because even the Bud's Buds recruitment video really wouldn't explain everything. I also don't understand why there would be a copy of that video in the vault. Again, it was meant for recruitment. Why would they put a copy in Vault 32 or 33? All told, the dwellers of 32 knew A, they were being managed by members of Bud's Buds, B, they were breeding stock for Bud's Buds, and C, they were effectively the elite of the vault dwellers chosen to inherit the earth. I understand being upset about the discovery that they were being managed and were being lied to, but I don't understand how these discoveries lead to murder or mass suicide. The murders especially are odd unless we assume that those killed were some of Bud's buds. We saw at least a few murders, and given that before the triennial trade raid there were 3 buds active in 33, there may have been as many as 3 or 4 buds active in 32 at the time. As for the suicides, the only way this makes sense to me is if they weren't aware that the surface was ready for resettlement, or if they couldn't leave to do so. From the fact that Moldaver used Rose McClane's Pip-Boy to open the vault door, we have to guess that the Overseer locked the door to all those with Pip-Boys from Vault 32. If they could open the door, then they chose death over attempting to send a scout to the surface. If they couldn't open the door, these people chose death over going along living as they had before. I understand how important a guiding narrative can be to a community, and how its loss can be devastating, but the narrative here really hasn't changed much. Instead of one day we'll rise to the surface to rebuild the world, it's now one day we'll rise to the surface to rebuild the world and we'll be the ones leading that effort. Again, up to this point of coverage, my problems with this come from a clue only identifiable as a clue with context not found in the show, and confusion on the motives that can only be guessed at as we don't have enough information. There's enough gray area here that I could be convinced that there's something here that caused these deaths, but it's not even my biggest issue with the failure of Vault 32. My real issue with the material comes from the fact that this event took place 2 years before the Triennial Trade Raid, and neither Hank McClane nor Bud Askins appears to have been aware of the issue. How did they have the ability to message each other and never once questioned the lack of response from 32? Does Bud Askins not have access to any data from 32 aside from what the Overseer tells him? How is Bud supposed to manage the experiment if he can't even get data on it? What does he even do in the decades between when he revives Buds if he can't monitor the other vaults? There is one other option as to why the Dwellers are dead, in which the vault activated some sort of chemical crowd control to make the vault suicidal, but I can't understand how Hank and Bud wouldn't be aware of that. Anyway, I think that's enough on that issue, so let's move on to the biggest issue with the show's writing, the Triennial Trade Raid. There are so many issues I have with this topic that it's hard to know where to start, so I think we should examine events chronologically. Even that's kind of hard to do because we don't have some information, so I'll have to speculate. Let me try to connect dots and steelman a version of events. Rose McClane leaves Vault 33, bringing the McClane children with her to Shady Sands, where she meets Moldaver. She tells Moldaver about her husband, Hank the Overseer from Vault 31, and about the vault and their triennial trade with Vault 32. Hank McClane arrives in Shady Sands and tries to talk his wife into coming home. Rose tells him that she's taken up with someone, a woman, and refuses to come home given what she knows about the world. Hank grabs the children and runs home to 33, nuking Shady Sands as he goes. While Moldaver survives practically unscathed, Rose becomes a ghoul. 18 to 19 years later, Moldaver gets a call from Dr. Siggy Wilzig. Dr. Wilzig hates the Enclave and wants to help the people of the Wasteland. He has learned of the existence of Moldaver's faction from Enclave surveillance and knows from Enclave records that she developed the cold fusion tech at their base. He contacts Moldaver at the Griffith Observatory and informs her that he has her tech and will bring it to her. He also tells her that the tech is locked and she'll need a vault tech higher up to unlock it. He uses his wealth of knowledge about the vaults to inform her about the vault cluster and Bud's Buds, a potential source of the vault tech higher up with the code she needs. From this information, Moldaver comes to the determination that Hank McClane would be the proper choice for the task. She leaves the Griffith Observatory armed with Rose's Pip-Boy bound for the vault cluster. Moldaver leaves most of her soldiers to guard the observatory, taking only a small escort with her that she plans to use to escort Hank McClane back home. She bulks her force by hiring a band of raiders with the promise of getting to loot a vault. Moldaver and her force arrive outside Vault 33 and find themselves locked out, as Hank put his wife's Pip-Boy on a blacklist. As an alternative, she finds the entrance to Vault 32. Though the Overseer of Vault 32 locked the door against Pip-Boys from Vault 32 to prevent his people from fleeing, it isn't locked against Pip-Boys from Vault 33, and Moldaver and her force enter. While being locked out of Vault 33 had led Moldaver to consider taking the Vault 32 Overseer captive as a substitute to Hank, she found 32 to be a dead vault. Luckily, thanks to her conversations with Rose, Moldaver knows the next triennial trade is coming up, and as the Overseer's terminal is still functional, she contacts Hank to arrange the upcoming trade. The soldiers and raiders put on the jumpsuits of the dead dwellers and make their way to the door. The door opens, and instead of simply grabbing Hank and making an exit, Moldaver and her force decide to play the part of dwellers from Vault 32 to enjoy a vault wedding. The dwellers of Vault 33 have turned off their Geiger counters in preparation for the wedding, so there's no notice of the radiation level on the people from outside the vault. The dwellers of 33 also don't think anything of the fact that they don't recognize any of these tattooed and scarred people because it's been 3 years since that last meeting. Moldaver tells Hank, who never met her when he went to Shady Sands, that a wheat blight took the last Overseer. The dwellers of 33 take it as reasonable that Vault 32 wouldn't have asked for help during their wheat blight, as Vault 33 didn't ask for help during the Great Plague of 77. Hank doesn't question why Overseer Moldaver never contacted him when she took over from Overseer Jackson until now, because he figures they can discuss things after the wedding. Moldaver and her people attend the wedding. Moldaver, wanting to ensure the safety of Rose's daughter Lucy, waits until she leaves the atrium to consummate her marriage before she starts her work. She then either orders the raiders to attack, or they get tired of waiting and begin to attack on their own. Moldaver and her soldiers leave the wedding and head into engineering, where she destroys the vault's water chip, an act of revenge for the destruction of Shady Sands. She takes hostages to lure Hank to the exit. She and her soldiers take Hank prisoner and then choose not to murder the captives, instead letting them flee, while she blows the way from Vault 33 to 32 closed. After exiting Vault 32, Moldaver takes Hank and flees back to the Griffith Observatory. As she didn't have enough forces to spare, she sent Rufus to carry a message to Ma June in Philly, leaving a third party to transport Dr. Wilzig to the observatory. Moldaver wasn't expecting the Enclave to put out a hit on Dr. Wilzig and thus was unfortunately unprepared to assist when things went poorly in Philly. Okay, that's the best I can do to steelman the situation. I hope you see the myriad issues already, but let's go over this line of events. First, there are an enormous number of assumptions being made here for this story to work. We have no concept of how Moldaver and Dr. Wilzig knew of each other's existence, nor how he knew how to get to her, nor how she knew he was coming. I'm assuming basically everything about the Raiders. Until episode 8, it's concealed that Moldaver is the head of the NCR Remnant Forces and has soldiers under her command. When I first saw episode 1, I assumed Moldaver was a Raider warlord based on the fact that she comes with Raiders. In this steel manning, I assume that she's bringing some soldiers for security and as an escort back, but it's entirely possible that the soldiers she leaves the vault with were Raiders willing to leave their brethren behind to take a larger paycheck. I assumed that Rose's Pip-Boy wouldn't work on Vault 33 because otherwise why not come in the front door? I also assumed that the Pip-Boy would work on 32 and continued with the assumption that the Vault 32 door didn't open for 32ers Pip-Boys from the previous issue. I'm assuming motives for things all over the place, like Moldaver and her people not grabbing Hank immediately because they wanted to enjoy the wedding. I honestly don't know why she wouldn't have grabbed him there, other than that it led to more dramatic moments like when Lucy discovered that her new husband was a Raider. Also, why would Moldaver put Rose's daughter in such danger? There are so many assumptions that have to be made to make a coherent story. That's enough on the assumptions. We've got other problems to consider, some of which I alluded to in the story. Why would they have a wedding party with the dwellers of Vault 32, even assuming that they were real vault dwellers? Wouldn't this make people suspicious as to why they would never have wedding parties with dwellers from Vault 31? Shouldn't they question why no one goes to Vault 31? Are we to assume that the dwellers of Vault 33 are incredibly inobservant and lack all suspicion? Maybe Hank doesn't recognize Moldaver, but how does no one realize they don't recognize anyone from the other vault that's only been 3 years? The Geiger counters on Pip-Boys are always on. Why didn't they report the issue with the 32ers immediately? How did the Raiders not win? They went from winning to being in prison without much connective tissue. Is the destruction of the watership really Moldaver's fault? If so, why? If that's not what she was doing, what was she doing? It's also only tangentially related to the raid on Vault 33, but why didn't Moldaver send forces to extract Wilzig? I get that she wanted to get Hank back home quickly, but it also seems like she could have waited in Philly for the doctor, as Lucy left the vault the day after Moldaver and reached Philly the same day as Dr. Wilzig. Okay, with some of the show's biggest errors covered, let's talk about my mistakes. In my review of the first episode, I noted that while war was always right around the corner, it seemed like the fear of said war was far more acute than usual. I didn't take into account that that very morning peace talks between the United States and China had failed. It's pretty obvious on rewatching. My next mistake, also from reviewing the first episode, is related to the time the bombs came down. Specifically, I stated that the bombs came down at 9:47 a.m. Washington, D.C. time, and incorrectly stated that the time in California would be 5:47 a.m. when it would actually be 6:47 a.m. Basic math error. My mind turned 4 time zones into subtract 4. Thank you viewer Psychosis 1179 for pointing this out. It should also be noted that the bombs on the West Coast fell first, with strikes cascading over the continent over time, so the first bomb to hit LA would probably have hit closer to 6 a.m. than to 7 a.m. Next, again in my review of episode 1, I said that the appearance of the Pridwin meant that the Brotherhood ending was now the canonical ending of Fallout 4, as all other storylines ended with the destruction of the Brotherhood of Steel airship Pridwin. This is inaccurate, as the Minutemen have an ending that does not involve destroying the Pridwin. Thank you to viewer Piratey Lass for pointing this out. I'd simply forgotten that that was possible. Next, I think the viewer Third Stooge is right, that I took the picture of CX404 too seriously in my review of the first episode. I asked why they would bother creating an image of CX404, given how long it takes to transmit images over radio, without considering that this was likely a joke in line with the wacky wasteland stuff. Next, I didn't consider that Snip Snip replaced Lucy's finger in episode 4 as part of his original programming that simply hadn't been removed. The proprietors of the Super Duper Mart seem like just the right level of too lazy to bother cutting that out. Thank you to viewer The Joker 138 for pointing this out. Next, thank you to viewer Just Another Account Here 2014 for pointing out that the Mount Wilson Observatory is another observatory in the LA area. I missed this in my sweep of the area for observatories the first time around. Lastly, I want to thank viewer Sean865 for sharing the theory that the reason Elder Cleric Quintus is so interested in Maximus and his career within the Brotherhood is because Quintus was the knight who saved him from Shady Sands. To be 100% clear here, it is not confirmed that Quintus rescued Maximus, but it would explain why he keeps an eye on Maximus and why he has involved himself with the Squire. With that said, let's talk about the characters, who they were when the show started, and who they became. When this all started, Lucy McLean was an ideal vault dweller. Friendly, inquisitive, helpful, and modest. About her skills, not so much when it comes to sexual matters. She loved her father and brother, and was looking forward to getting married and having kids to perpetuate America. She believed wholeheartedly in the vault's mission of reclamation and was ready to do her part. By the end of the season, she has lost her innocence, her belief in the mission of the vaults, and her father. All she has now is her brother Norm, who is currently inaccessible to her in a vault, Maximus, with whom she fell in love along the way, and hatred and confusion for her father and Vault-Tec. When this all started, Maximus was a Brotherhood aspirant. Within the Brotherhood, he was something of a punching bag for other aspirants and had only one true friend, Dane. He dreamed of becoming a knight, putting on a suit of power armor, and saving those in need. By the end of the season, he's been thrust unwillingly into the position of knight that he once coveted, and he longs for a life and peace with Lucy. A couple more notes before moving on. First, when Thaddeus believed that Maximus was dead, he unknowingly told him that he was the punching bag before Maximus joined, and that he wished that Maximus had lived long enough to leave that position behind. I don't see how this makes any sense chronologically. Maximus appears to have been rescued by the Brotherhood in 2077 or 2282 and 2283, depending on when you place the explosion. 19 to 14 years later and he's still the punching bag? I don't see how that works. The only thing I can guess is that the Brotherhood took Maximus somewhere until he was old enough to become an aspirant, but we saw kids in the Flatlands compound, so that doesn't add up either. Second, it's entirely possible that Maximus thinks that Lucy left with her father. Hank knocked him out, the ghoul shot Hank and forced him to flee, Lucy left with a ghoul. Then he woke up. For all he knows, Lucy left with a man who nuked his childhood home and nearly killed him. Anyway, onto the ghoul. When this all started, the ghoul was dug up from a grave in what I assume is Baja California. His rescuers attempted to hire him to help them on the Wilzig bounty. He killed them for their trouble and decided to take on the bounty solo. He was incredibly violent, free of moral constraints, and a junkie for practically every drug. By the end of the season, he has refocused himself from needless violence and hedonism to the goal of finding his family and wreaking vengeance upon Vault-Tec. On to Cooper Howard. A couple things first. Of course, Cooper Howard and the Ghoul are the same person, but he has two separate arcs in the show, so I'm covering them independently. Second, the beginning of the arc is at the start of episode 3, the end is at the start of episode 1, and we're missing a big chunk of said arc. Anyway though, Cooper Howard was a wealthy former cowboy, Sino-American war veteran, loving husband and father, and movie star who was beginning a new career as the spokesman for Vault-Tec. He was a patriotic American, a supporter of Vault-Tec, and an ardent anti-communist. By the end, he was a divorced former movie star, accused communist, had been replaced as Vault-Tec's spokesman by Vault Boy, and was performing as a cowboy at kids' parties just to get by. Hank McLean was a vault dweller, widower, and a loving and beloved father of 2 children. By the end, he was revealed to be a pre-war Vault-Tec junior executive, the murderer of his own wife, a purveyor of nuclear doom, and was despised by his own daughter. Norm McLean was a vault dweller who lacked enthusiasm for all things and went through life on autopilot. By the end, he was an inquisitive adventurer, the only dweller of Vault 33 to have discovered the full truth about his vault, and was locked away behind the door of Vault 31. Stephanie Harper was a dweller of Vault 33, a wife, and expecting mother. By the end, she was revealed to be a pre-war Vault-Tec junior executive, was a widow and mother, was in a relationship with Chet, and was the interim overseer of the newly repopulated Vault 32. Chet was the gatekeeper of Vault 33, a cousin of the McLeans, a friend of Norm McLean, and in unrequited love with Lucy. By the end, he had had his fill of vault investigations with Norm, was the reluctant domestic partner of Stephanie Harper, and had become a dweller of Vault 32. Betty Pearson was a former overseer of Vault 33 and a member of the Vault Council. By the end, she was revealed to be a pre-war Vault-Tec junior executive, had once again become overseer of Vault 33, and had split the Vault's population to refill Vault 32. Reg McPhee was a member of the Vault Council. By the end, he was a failed candidate in the election for Vault Overseer who voted against himself in the election. Woody Thomas was a member of the Vault Council. By the end, he was a failed candidate in the election for Vault Overseer of Vault 33 and an unwilling dweller of Vault 32. Dane was a Brotherhood aspirant and the only friend of Maximus. By the end, he was a squire who had maimed himself to avoid action, had been deployed to fight in the first wave of an assault on the Griffith Observatory, and was responsible for the field promotion of Maximus to knight. Elder Cleric Quintus was the cleric in charge of Maximus's interrogation and his ascension to squire. By the end, he's preparing to start a schism in the Brotherhood to create his own organization. Thaddeus was a Brotherhood aspirant and the chief bully of Maximus. By the end, he's a former squire in the Brotherhood of Steel, currently becoming a super mutant or ghoul. As a side note, how is the actor who portrays Thaddeus, Johnny Pemberton, 43 years old? I thought by the look of him that he was in his 20s. Anyway, on to Bud Askins. Bud Askins was a former manager at Westech who became a vice president and HR R&D at Vault-Tec. By the end, he's a brain in a jar, monitoring his executive training program, Bud's Buds, in Vault 31. Barb Howard was a Vault-Tec executive, the wife of Cooper Howard, and the mother of Janie Howard. By the end, she was divorced from Cooper Howard, was partially responsible for the resource wars of the mid-21st century, and was plotting the demise of civilization and the rise of a one-world government under Vault-Tec. Lee Moldaver was known as Miss Williams, was the inventor of cold fusion, and was the leader of an anti-government, anti-corporate group. By the end, she was the head of an NCR remnant organization that used cold fusion to power all of Los Angeles from the Griffith Observatory. She orchestrated a mass murder and caused her friend-slash-lover's daughter to be married to a psychopathic raider who nearly killed her. She threatened to blow up several hostages, including a pregnant woman. She had followers who worshipped her as the Flame Mother by rubbing themselves with cremains, drinking blood, and chanting. She ate lavishly, while her people lived in tents and ate communal soup. And she kept her friend-slash-lover's shambling ghoul body with her like a pet. While her friendliness with Maximus and Lucy makes her seem like a more reasonable leader, and she's presented as a hero in the end, there are a lot of issues with her actions. Dr. Siggy Wilzig was an Enclave research scientist who saved CX-404 from euthanasia and carried cold fusion out of the Enclave. By the end, he had, by the efforts of Lucy McLean, brought cold fusion to the Griffith Observatory and allowed the NCR to power the LA Basin. There are a few other characters, but they didn't really have an arc to follow, so let's move on to new lore elements added to the Fallout universe. Let's start with elements exclusive to the pre-war period. The first scene of the first episode gives the first indication I've seen in the Fallout universe that peace negotiations were taking place. It seems that these negotiations were occurring in Anchorage, a recent war zone the United States had retaken from the Chinese. These negotiations also appear to have been stymied by the president's absence. We know from the games that the president was on the Poseidon Energy oil rig at the time. The peace talks appear to have failed the morning of the bombs, or more likely the night before, as it would have been quite early on a Saturday morning in Alaska for the peace talks to be taking place at all. It seems likely that the failure of these peace talks was the immediate prelude to war. Next, the Capitol Post, read by Cooper Howard, told us 3 new things about the pre-war world. Nuka-Cola attempted a reformulation known as New Nuka, Wilson Automatoys was being sued over their Giddy-Up Buttercup, and the United States Navy still operated battleships up to the 2070s in the Fallout universe. Next, from the news reports that Cooper Howard was watching in a bar while waiting for Charlie Whiteknife, we know that there was competition underway between the United States and our allies for control of the global uranium supply. With that said, let's talk about the new creatures and creature details we saw. First of all, we saw an unmutated fawn in episode 3. From production publicity photos that showed Ella Purnell dressed as Lucy feeding a real fawn, it's clear that this was not CGI, so the question is, do we assume there are more unmutated deer in the world, or is this simply a one-off that the show put in because they could use a real animal? To be clear, deer have existed previously in the Fallout universe as the two-headed radstag of Fallout 4 and Fallout 76. Next, we saw a pair of goats just outside Philly. The closest thing we've seen to this before are the bighorners of the Mojave Wasteland. Next, we saw a Brahmin in Philly fully covered in hair. Is this normal for Brahmin in the region? Prior to this, all Brahmin were practically hairless, red, two-headed cows. This Brahmin still had 2 heads, hence my use of the term Brahmin, but the skin and hair are unexplained. Next, we saw a new variant of Gulper, one I refer to as the LA Gulper. The term Vault 4 Gulper works just as well, but regardless of what you call them, they're only nominally related to the Gulpers found on the East Coast. While the East Coast Gulpers are mutated salamanders, the LA Gulpers are engineered creatures, primarily made with human DNA. They were originally made in Vault 4 by scientists who were attempting to hybridize humans with radiation-resistant species. Viewer Spartan22294 suggested that they resemble axolotl, and I have to agree. I will say, however, that while axolotl are cancer-resistant, they do not seem to be radiation-resistant. Next, we see on Moldaver's feast table a roasted two-headed pig. This is, as far as I know, the first pig we've seen in the Fallout universe. Personally, I would have expected rad pigs, or whatever they're called, to be more like wild boars than be two-headed, but maybe that's just me. Lastly, we received specifics on rad roaches from Dr. Siggy Wilzig in Episode 2. As he says, they have enlarged thorax to ward off attack, extended antenna in order to hunt in packs, incisors to help ingest larger prey. With that said, there's also new lore on plants. We see several varieties of food crops in the Fallout show that we haven't seen before in the post-war of the Fallout universe. Specifically at the Philly marketplace, we see cherries and cherry tomatoes when the ghoul eats a handful of them. Along with this, we saw tomatoes, potatoes, apples, and pears on Moldaver's feast table. Besides this, Norm and Chet used the excuse that they were planting tatoes to explain the dirt on their clothes when they returned from Vault 32. Tatoes are a mutated hybrid of potatoes and tomatoes, said to taste like ketchup on cardboard. Prior to this, we'd never seen tatoes in a vault, and though it might seem like a piece of bad lore, tatoes actually appear to have been developed pre-war by the West Tech Corporation as part of the Pan-Immunity Varian Project's Greenhouse Initiative in Huntersville, West Virginia. As to why they would grow tatoes instead of tomatoes and potatoes, I couldn't tell you. Aside from plants and animals, the Fallout show showed us several new technologies we've never seen before. Let's start with a technology that's not really new, we're just seeing it here for the first time. Image transmission via radio and graph coordinates. Though a slow process, we see the Brotherhood transmit the image of Dr. Wilzig and CX-404 in the first episode. Next, Jim's Limbs, a product line that made an appearance in Episode 2. The equipment seems to consist of a device to chew a limb to a proper length, so that a prosthetic foot, or presumably a hand, can be attached to said device. In proper Fallout fashion, it appears to be dangerous, painful, and only marginally helpful. Next, the Fallout show and its extras introduced us to Vault-Tec plans A, B, C, and D. In the extra video, Follow Your Nose, Bud Askins answers a presumed objection to purchasing space in a vault. It's unjust to leave people to die. Bud says there are other options offered by Vault-Tec. Plan A is a standard Vault-Tec vault, a buried, well-stocked bunker to shelter a population for decades. Vault-Tec Plan B is a surface shelter. Vault-Tec Plan C is a cardboard box. Lastly, Vault-Tec Plan D is a pill, which he says is for those too lazy to inherit any wealth at all. We see Vault-Tec Plan D twice in Episode 2, once early on where it's clear that a family used it just after the bombs, and once where it's used by Dr. Siggy Wilzig. He tells Lucy that it was a cyanide pill and that it was the most humane product that Vault-Tec ever made. It was quick, painless, tasted like banana. I was surprised it wasn't more popular. Next, there's the radiation tracker device used first by Thaddeus and later by a cleric. I believe that Thaddeus misunderstood the tech as he believed they were tracking the ghoul, while the cleric used it to search for the cold fusion artifact in the false head of Dr. Wilzig. I believe that this is what the tracker is actually following, as it would explain how Maximus and Thaddeus ended up in the river. Next, we watched Snip Snip, the medical Mr. Handy at the Super Duper Mart, use a flesh welding laser never before seen to attach a new finger to the stump of a severed finger on Lucy's hand. Lucy's new finger works after this, meaning that the laser flesh welding includes the connection of blood vessels, nerves, ligaments, and tendons. At the very least, these medical Mr. Handys can reattach digits. Next, in Episode 7, we saw the leaders of Vault 4 play a tape for Lucy. They played this tape using a Radiation Queen videotape player. Next, also in Episode 7, we saw Cooper Howard attach a listening device given to him by Miss Williams to Barb Howard's Pip-Boy. It synchronizes automatically, making me believe this is a standard product. A Pip-Boy earpiece. An earpiece would explain us being able to hear our radio while enemies can't. Next, we have the machine operated by the brain of Bud Askins, a device that appears to me to be a precursor to the RoboBrain. Whether it came before RoboBrains or not depends on when he transferred his brain. Next, apparently Repcon Aerospace was in the process of developing a milk delivery robot. Why a rocket company would be building such a thing is beyond me. Lastly, in new tech, we have the DNA scanning beam that was a part of Bud Askins' brain on a Roomba form. This beam is apparently capable of scanning a person, determining the DNA profile from said scan, and comparing that profile against a database of DNA profiles. It is from this device that Bud discovers that Norm MacLean has half his DNA from his father. Besides these new technologies, we also saw updates to some of the technologies we've seen before in the Fallout games. First, we saw a Pip-Boy tracking device for the first time. While in the games we've been able to track characters before, we now have a potential method by which that works. Lucy pulled an actual physical tracking device from her Pip-Boy and shoved it up the nostril of the disembodied head of Dr. Siggy Wilzig, allowing her to keep track of it even when it left her possession. Now, I would hope that the courier isn't shoving trackers up the holes of their companions, but this gives us a potential understanding of how that tech works. Next, we learned several things about power armor. Let's start with the updates to the physical form of the armor. Though I don't like the Iron Manization of the power armor, there are a couple of other changes to the suits that I do like. Specifically, the backs of helmets now open, allowing squires to refill the suit's water reservoir. The reservoir is new, but as it allows the operator to stay hydrated, I think it makes sense. While I don't like that the back of the helmet opens as it's another weak spot and potential leak point for toxic gas to get in, I think the reservoir is a good change. It wasn't mentioned, but this makes me think that there's some sort of catheter involved as well. I'm sure that the same people that don't want helmets coming off in battle to drink don't want the operator to get out of their suits to pee, or just wet themselves. The Brotherhood also appears to have added locks to their fusion cores, which feels like a good idea. Given the rarity of fusion cores and the fact that the suit's now locked down totally when unpowered, keeping the core from being yanked by an unauthorized party seems like a good idea. Along with this, the Brotherhood has found a use for the loops on the front of the T-60, holding squires, a method they utilize when dropping from an airborne vertibird to the ground using the new winches attached to said vertibirds. We also learned a few things about the development history of power armor. First, we saw that Bud Askins, a manager at Westech during the Sino-American War, oversaw the product rollout for the T-45 power armor. There were serious flaws in the welding of the T-45 that caused a lot of casualties for the operators on the Alaskan front, flaws of which Westech was aware. We also learned that after the Battle of Anchorage, the T-60 power armor was developed. While updates and upgrades were made, the flaws in the welding at the base of the breastplate stuck around. Next, we've learned two things about Mr. Handy robots. First, we now know that Mr. Handys have fusion cores within them, and that's how they've maintained their operations over 2 centuries. Second, we know that Sebastian Leslie provides their voice. Leslie was an actor who portrayed a butler named Bartholomew Codsworth on a television show. Robco bought the television studio, paid Leslie $186,000 and a Mr. Handy for his rights, and that cleared the way for General Atomics International to use his voice for their fleet. Next, when looking at the cryo caskets in Vault 33, I was thinking for a moment that they appeared to be an updated version of the cryo capsules we see in Vault 111. But then I remembered that those capsules had a different purpose. Bud's buds knew they were going into cryogenic sleep. The dwellers of Vault 111 didn't. Vault 111's experiment was designed to test the long-term effects of suspended animation on unaware human subjects, so it makes sense that their capsules wouldn't look like Vault 31's caskets. They were told they were going to be decontaminated before going deeper into the vault. That's harder to sell when the capsule looks like those caskets do. Lastly, we learned that cold fusion was a technology developed by the woman we know before the war as Miss Williams and after the war as Lee Moldaver. Before this point, we saw cold fusion used to power Vault-Tec's Garden of Eden creation kit, a terraforming tool used to restore the environment of the world post-war. Here we saw it used to restore power to the grid in Los Angeles at the very least. Now we know that the tech was developed pre-war and was purchased by Vault-Tec to prevent it from being used to end the resource wars, as they needed those wars to continue so they could continue their plans. It'll be interesting to see more about the creator of cold fusion and how the LA reactor is used going forward. With that said, we learned some things about the LA wasteland, so let's talk about that. First, there's a wasteland industry known as fly farming. From what we hear from Thaddeus, it involves having people eat, then poop, and then that poop is used to feed flies, likely the large flies in the Fallout universe known as bloat flies. The flies are then blended up and sold as protein. As I said in my review of episode 3, the flow of the process makes sense, but I have to wonder how they can afford to feed crappers enough to still get enough protein off the back end to make it all make financial sense. Next, in episode 7, we're introduced to the lead farming industry. This involves people with metal detectors going to old battle sites, extracting old slugs, and melting them down to recover the lead for more bullets. Next, there's an entire industry set up to harvest organs of ghouls, seemingly to produce the yellow chemical that keeps ghouls from going feral. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Lastly in this section, we learn that there are multiple governments operating in the LA area as of 2297. At the very least, there were Moldaver's remnants of the NCR and Sorrel Booker's government. With Moldaver gone, one has to wonder if President Booker is looking to expand his domain. With that said, let's talk about what we've learned about ghouls. First, there's been a debate over the years as to whether or not ghouls can survive without eating, and it seems that the Fallout show adds a point to the survival without eating side of the argument. At the end of the first episode, the ghoul is disinterred from a grave in which he's been buried alive. From the dialogue, it would seem to be the case that he has been dug up, tortured, and reburied for a year at a time in recent history. The only thing we see feeding into the grave is IVs of the anti-fertilization drug. Maybe we're not supposed to take this as fully canonical, but if it is, then it says that ghouls don't necessarily need to eat to survive. Next, the ghoul sews his severed finger back on after a day of it being cut off, and it works immediately. This points to ghouls being able to reattach digits without issue after at least a day. Next, we watched two ghouls move towards becoming feral, both Roger and Martha. The ghoul killed Roger before he could turn feral, and Lucy killed Martha after she turned. It seems they were attempting to remind themselves of who they were, and were fighting becoming animalistic before it fully took over. Lastly in this section, the Fallout show added a chemical that helps prevent ghouls from turning feral. This is a heretofore unseen chemical with an entire human trafficking industry attached to it. We'll just have to hope we get more information on what this chemical is and where it comes from in the next season. With that covered, let's talk about updates to organizations, starting with Vault-Tec. Let's start with the 4 vaults that the show added to the Fallout universe. By added, I don't literally mean added, as we already knew there are 120-something vaults in existence, but the show filled us in on these 4. From the show, we know that Vault 4 has a 3-foot thick lead lining, was built to house 200 people, was staffed by 80 scientists and their families before the war, and that the Vault was experimenting with hybridizing humans with radiation-resistant species. This led the Vault to becoming the source of LA gulpers. At some point, not long after the war, the scientists who controlled the Vault were overthrown by the test subjects, who then controlled the Vault for the next 200-odd years. When Shady Sands was nuked, Vault 4 offered the refugees asylum. Today, the Vault has surface foraging teams that range out at least as far as the train tunnel mouth where Maximus was stuck in his armor, and they have equipment capable of carrying said armor that distance. Lastly, the Vault is oddly powered off a single miniaturized fusion core. Vaults 31, 32, and 33 are all connected as a Vault cluster. This was an idea of Bud Askins, who planned to use the Vault to breed super managers to carry his view of how society should be structured long into the future. His experiment doesn't seem to be working, as what the Vault is producing, generally speaking, are sheep incapable of curiosity and critical thinking aside from Lucy and Norm McLean. One has to assume that after 219 years, when most of the people are too closely related to allow reproduction, that everyone's got some DNA from his buds in them. Intermarriage between the Vaults was a fairly regular practice that required applicants to apply to their respective Vault councils. Vault 31 is the command vault in which Bud Askins, in the form of Brain on a Roomba, drifts slowly into insanity while listening to German polka and practicing speeches instead of monitoring Vaults 32 and 33. He's alone, aside from his many frozen buds, whom he presumably revives 2 at a time once a generation to ensure that there are always 2 to 4 buds in each vault. The little we know of Vault 32 before the Triennial Trade Raid points to it being practically identical to Vault 33. If this is true, it was a meritocracy where people took pride in doing the right thing. The dwellers were told that the surface was too radioactive for healthy resettlement, so they were waiting for Reclamation Day, the day they could return to the surface to rebuild civilization. In the meantime, they were relentlessly self-improving and compliant with the rules. As stated previously, my bet is that if their primary crop was wheat, as suggested by Moldaver in episode 1, then they probably had a projected backdrop of Kansas instead of Nebraska, like the backdrop that accompanied Vault 33's cornfield. For some unknown reason, sometime in 2294 or 2295, Vault 32 suffered a total loss. I detailed above what I believe are potential reasons for its collapse, but we don't have anything definitive. In 2297, the population of Vault 33 split in half and then moved into Vault 32. The population is led, as usual, by a dweller from Vault 31, Stephanie Harper. How these dramatically reduced vault populations will be able to operate either vault sufficiently, I'm not sure. Much of the foundational material for 33 was laid out in that section, so let's talk about what makes 33 different from 32. Sometime around 2277, the Overseer's wife, Rose McLean, discovered that water was draining from the vault's water supply. She took this to mean that there was life on the surface and that the radiation readings were wrong. She told her husband, and he told her to forget it. Instead of doing this, she took the kids and fled into the wasteland. As an aside, I don't know what settlement could possibly have been draining the water from 33, as there's nothing visibly near to it on the surface. Regardless, the overseer locked the dwellers in their rooms in a fake quarantine so that he could chase after his family. He returned with his children and the vault went back to normal until 2297. That was the year of the triennial trade raid that resulted in a dozen odd deaths in the vault, the destruction of the vault's water chip, the kidnapping of the overseer, and his daughter chasing after her father. In the aftermath of this, Betty Pearson, another dweller from Vault 31, was elected overseer after having left the role to Hank McLean 16 years prior. That pretty much covers the vaults, so let's talk about what we learned about vault life. We learned from Amazon Extras that the vaults produce oysters as part of their waste management and food production program. That being said, most of the rest of what we learned about vault life is relationship-based information. Specifically, in genetically homogeneous vaults, though consanguine reproductive relationships are not allowed, recreational sexual relationships are permitted. The activities in these relationships are referred to as cousin stuff. Along with this, cohabitation between unwed members of the opposite sex is permitted. Vault 33, at the very least, has a communal wedding dress that is shared between brides, a practice that may extend to other vaults as well. For the purpose of marriage ceremonies, there is a specific garb worn by vault chaplains when they officiate. With that covered, let's talk about what we learned about Vault-Tec employees and office life at Vault-Tec. Keep in mind that most of this is from the Amazon Extras, which I recommend you check out. Anyway, employees start off as part-time sales associates that can earn a full-time contract, potentially including healthcare. Successful sales associates can then rise to become full-time salesmen. I believe that this was the level of employee that visited Nate and Nora on the day of the bombs. These salesmen were trained to make the sale no matter what, assuaging concerns, noting hypocrisy, and were even given a version of the Bible printed by Vault-Tec to convince reluctant buyers. The most successful salesmen then became sales managers, managing salesmen. It's at this point that they would start working at the Vault-Tec office buildings. Here they would find their work and movements closely monitored, and their access to different floors controlled by their Pip-Boys. Rewards for hard work ranged from bathroom tokens to days of vacation. Taking vacation was, of course, frowned upon. Successful managers were then promoted to regional managers, and they started managing managers. This is the level where they were told the truth about Vault-Tec's plans, and where they were dispatched to work with other Enclave organizations. The most successful regional managers then became associate vice presidents. These employees would travel the world to advance Vault-Tec's mission, working directly for high-level executives. They were sometimes required to lie to Congress and work with foreign governments and cults to control global politics. The most successful associate vice presidents then became senior executive senior vice presidents. These employees would work constantly but could do so from anywhere, including the yachts they were wealthy enough to purchase. Their entire job was to ensure the profits of the company. The company was headed by a board of 6 men, including an unnamed CEO. Most of the company's decisions were made for it by a large language model computer, and inter-office communications were made possible by Thomas, the total office multi-channel intercom system. Outside of the typical stream of advancement was Bud's Buds, an HR R&D initiative run by Bud Askins. Bud claims that Vault-Tec developed a form of corn that has to be handled with gloves designed by Vault-Tec, which can grow at any time of year, unlike normal corn that rises and falls with the seasons. Just as Vault-Tec has broken corn from its nature, his goal is to break civilization from its nature to rise and fall. We've talked about Bud's Buds before, so I'll just close this part by saying that those eligible for the program were executive assistants that were previously the cream of the crop from Vault-Tec University. This means that most of his buds were likely in their 20s. With that covered, let's talk about some of the things we learned about the operations of Vault-Tec before the war and after. The Fallout show tells us that Vault-Tec was a $1 trillion company, the fastest growing company in the world, and the largest company in the world. We know that they made a practice out of buying up companies and merging technology gained from those purchases to bulk out their own portfolio, or suppressed them to prevent their use from harming company goals. Those goals were, in the short term, to harm the peace process to sell more vaults, and in the long term, to end the world in nuclear fire so that they could rebuild the world in their image. Their belief was that with the entire world's population being vault dwellers and their descendants, there would be unity, cooperation, and peace. As a side note, this is utterly bat crap crazy. Factionalism is a part of human nature. All forms of Christianity believe in Christ, but our sects have discriminated against each other and even fought bloody wars, sometimes specifically because the beliefs don't align exactly. If belief in a common god isn't enough to prevent factionalism in war, how does Vault-Tec expect vault dwellers from 20-odd control vaults spread across the country to work together in peace and perpetuity? This gets even crazier when you understand that some of those control vaults are already open. open, and generations of vault dwellers have lived on the surface, working with wastelanders. How could those dweller descendants align with those who are still living in vaults now? Regardless of this, we also learned from the show that Pip-Boys were a later entry into the vault program, and were part of a deal worked by Bud Askins with Robco. Around the same time, dogs were banned from the vaults. Along with this, we learned that some of the vault experiments were designed by other Enclave-associated corporations. Lastly, in terms of pre-war operations, Cooper Howard was the original Vault-Tec spokesman until Vault Boy replaced him. The biggest thing we learned about post-war Vault-Tec, aside from the fact that they still exist, is that they have nuclear capabilities. Hank McClane nuked Shady Sands because it was a threat to the future of Vault-Tec's plans. I have to wonder why Vault-Tec allowed civilization to rise to any extent. Why didn't they nuke the world a second time after the dust settled from the Great War to ensure their plans? Anyway, I have one piece of speculation about Vault-Tec before moving on. I believe that the version of Vault-Tec instituted by the show is a technocratic organization. In the 1930s, after the market crashed and the world had fallen into the Great Depression, there were a lot of people that considered capitalism to be a failed experiment. Some wanted to try communism, but for many that was a disaster as well. There was talk of a third way. For some, this third way was fascism, but there were other third way ideas. One of these was technocracy. The idea of technocracy is to build a society governed by scientists and engineers. Effectively, you put the most technically proficient people in charge of designing a better society. In the end, the movement failed to get any real traction at the time and was in fact banned in many jurisdictions. The movement still exists today to an extent. One of the more interesting things to me is that many of the Vault-Tec executives we see wear colors that were associated with the technocracy movement. The movement had a uniform of a gray suit with a blue necktie, and their symbol was an orange and white yin-yang sort of symbol without the dots. The colors symbolize production and consumption. While it could be a coincidence, we see Vault-Tec executives in gray suits, often with blue ties, and Barb Howard wears orange regularly. Along with this, we see an alternative to technocracy in Vault 4, Scientocracy, the rule by scientists, which we see end disastrously. While I'd love to see more engineers, scientists, and doctors elected to government and fewer lawyers, I'm not on board with technocracy. It's tempting to attempt to engineer a better society, but it rarely works out well. That covers what I have on the updates to Vault-Tec, so let's talk about the Brotherhood of Steel. To properly discuss all the changes to the Brotherhood of Steel, we need to establish a basic understanding of the organization. Some of you likely know this material, so bear with me a moment. In 2077, U.S. Army Captain Roger Maxson was the second in command of an Army unit guarding a West-Tec scientific research operation at the Mariposa military base. When it was discovered that West-Tec was experimenting on military prisoners, exposing them to FEV and turning them into super mutants, the soldiers arrested the scientists. Captain Maxson's superior locked himself in his office and took his own life, leaving Maxson in command. He questioned the scientists and executed them when he was done. He learned that his government hadn't just been aware of the experiments, they had sanctioned them. He declared his unit's secession from the United States over the radio. The bombs came down 3 days later. Having avoided a direct strike on the day of the bombs, Maxson shepherded his soldiers and their families to the Lost Hills bunker, where they rode out the worst of the apocalypse. In the summer of 2082, Captain Maxson reorganized his forces into the Brotherhood of Steel. In large part, this was to separate his forces from their military background, to avoid some form of old world authority from rising up and commanding him and his followers to rebuild the world that was lost in the same image. It was also done to give his people's lives meaning, as this new uniting mythology gave them an ideal for which to strive. While Elder Maxson wanted his organization to focus on the twin goals of collecting technology and saving the people of the wasteland, his son and the other leaders in the Brotherhood were more isolationist. In the summer of 2086, the Brotherhood refocused exclusively on preserving technology. Eventually, Roger Maxson passed on and became something of a legend in the Brotherhood, but one or more of his descendants were always a part of the organization. By the late 2260s, the last remaining descendant was a young boy named Arthur Maxson. When the Brotherhood decided to send an expedition to the capital wasteland under Elder Owen Lyons, Arthur Maxson was put under the Elder's care. Thus, Arthur Maxson crossed the continent and became a resident of the Citadel, the Brotherhood's name for their fortress within the ruins of the Pentagon. When Elder Lyons' expedition arrived, they found technology as instructed, but also discovered a super mutant threat of unknown origin. Unwilling to let the people around Washington, D.C. suffer, Elder Lyons refocused his chapter of the Brotherhood on the original twin goals laid out by Elder Roger Maxson. A large minority within the chapter disagreed with this change in focus so dramatically that they were cast out of the Brotherhood by Elder Lyons. Taking the name The Outcasts, these members of the Brotherhood continued to operate in DC, outside the control of Elder Lyons. When the elders on the West Coast heard of Elder Lyons' actions, they disavowed him, but he ignored their objections. In 2277, the forces of the Enclave arrived in the Capital Wasteland in force. The Brotherhood had faced off with the Enclave before in California, but in the Capital Wasteland, their face-off amounted to a full-scale war. Not long after the Brotherhood and the Lone Wanderer of Vault 101 defeated the Enclave and resolved the local super mutant threat, Elder Lyons passed away. He was replaced by his daughter Sarah Lyons, but she died in combat not long after. Over the next few years, there was a succession of ineffective elders. During this time, Arthur Maxson developed an almost mythological reputation within the Brotherhood. At age 12, he had killed 2 raiders while on patrol. At 13, he slew a Deathclaw, gaining the scar on his face. At 15, he defeated the super mutant known as Shepard, who was attempting to reunite the super mutants of the Capital Wasteland. At 16, he negotiated the return of the Outcasts to the Capital Wasteland Brotherhood and was made Elder of the Eastern Brotherhood, the youngest elder in history. While Arthur Maxson has become a legend, the airship that would become the Prydwen was being designed and built. Though it was finished before he became elder, it was Arthur who named the ship. He told the helmsman, Lancer Captain Kells, that the name was a work from historical fiction. Quote, something about a man who was destined to be a king and his journey to liberate his people from tyranny and oppression, unquote. After a few years in which the Prydwen traveled up and down the East Coast, a message from Recon Squad Gladius brought the ship and Elder Arthur Maxson to the Commonwealth in 2287. Though we don't know the exact outcome of the events in the Commonwealth, we see the Prydwen arrive at the Flatlands base of the Western Brotherhood in 2297. This is significant as there are only 2 endings in Fallout 4 in which the Prydwen is not destroyed, the Brotherhood ending and the Minutemen ending. Regardless, the Brotherhood of 2297 is significantly different from the Hidden Valley Brotherhood of 2282 and the Commonwealth Brotherhood of 2287. I believe that these changes come down directly to Elder Arthur Maxson. Consider Elder Maxson's statement to Lancer Captain Kells that he named his ship in relation to a man who was destined to become king. The name comes from Arthurian legend, specifically the Welsh myth Prede Anuven, or the Spoils of Anuven as it's known in English. In this myth, the Prydwen is a ship that bears King Arthur to and from Anuven, the Welsh otherworld. It's a short poem from sometime in the mid to late 1st millennium AD that even in English is difficult to read. Regardless, the Prydwen is the ship of King Arthur. As of 2297, those with the rank Knight, a rank that has existed since 2082, have a new title, Lord. It appears that Arthur Maxson is attempting not only to be Elder of the Brotherhood of Steel, but King of a new feudal state across the wastelands of old America. One of the other changes we see is that the Brotherhood seems to be adopting religious fashions as well. Scribes have become clerics. These clerics swing incense, scatter holy water, and chant. As for the Brotherhood chapters outside of Maxson's direct control, we see that the Brotherhood of Steel on the West Coast has recovered to an extent. By the time of Fallout New Vegas in 2282, they were in a pretty poor state, but we see a lot of personnel in the Flatlands Brotherhood. That being said, the squires here are poorly educated and are considered cannon fodder. Whether their life as servants is a consequence of the rise of King Arthur Maxson, or if it predated that, I don't know. But we see them carrying sacks practically as large as themselves and chasing after their knights. In terms of their attitudes towards outsiders, we saw the Brotherhood conquer Philly and the Griffith Observatory. Philly was a neutral town that the Brotherhood took to create a temporary outpost while the New California Republic controlled the Griffith Observatory. While the NCR and the Brotherhood weren't on good terms, it still shocks me that they obliterated this remnant of the Republic. Lastly, we saw Dane and a body of squires promote Maximus to Knight by popular affirmation. We'll see whether this stands or not in Season 2. With that covered, let's talk about what we learned of the Enclave from the Fallout show. First, a quick note on what the Enclave is, as the show didn't bother to explain it. Before the war, the Enclave was a fascistic organization that counted among its members the heads of major corporations, high-ranking government officials, and high-ranking military officers that sought to be the power behind the scenes, driving American policy in their desired direction. After the bombs, the Enclave was composed of those same parties, but instead of being a loose coalition, they were a single authoritarian organization that contends that it is the last legitimate remnant of the US government. While that organization is split into chapters, they're all Enclave, instead of being Enclave in industry or Enclave in military. They have bases of operation across the country, typically in bunkers that were controlled by the government, but for a time, their command base was on an oil rig in the Pacific Ocean constructed by Poseidon Energy. They've made an appearance in Fallout 2, 3, New Vegas, 4, and 76. With that covered, let's get to show-specific information. Somewhere in the mountains, the Enclave has a West Coast base of operations. This base looks to me like something they've had since before the war, which is interesting because it implies that it evaded detection during the destruction of the Enclave oil rig and their base at Navarro. Regardless of this, at this outpost, the Enclave trains dogs, runs tests with FEV, and experiments with cold fusion at the very least. Along with this, from the Amazon extras, we now know that the pre-war Enclave was made up from the following groups at the very least: the US government, the US military, Big Mountain, Nuka-Cola, Poseidon Energy and PetroChico, Pulowski Preservation Services, Robco, Slocum's Joe, Super Duper Mart, Vault-Tec, and West-Tech. Now onto what we learned of the New California Republic. First, a quick rundown of the NCR, the closest the wasteland has seen to a proper rebirth of the United States in terms of values. The foundation of the New California Republic was laid in Shady Sands in 2186, and in 2189 it became a combination of 5 states: Shady, Los Angeles, Maxon, Hub, and Dayglow. By 2241, the Republic had grown to host 700,000 people. Over time, it grew geographically to reach from southern Oregon in the north to Baja California in the south and the Mojave in the east. In 2274, the NCR began to access the Mojave wasteland surrounding Las Vegas. They sent power from Hoover Dam and water from Lake Mead back home to the NCR. In 2277, their force at the Hoover Dam was assaulted from the east by Caesar's Legion, a unified band of tribes. They held the line at the First Battle of Hoover Dam, but they spent the next 5 years in an intractable fight with the Legion. By 2282, things were not going well for the NCR outside the Mojave either. The Republic had drained the lakes in California, land ownership had taken a dive as Brahmin barons bought up everything. Food production was forecasted not to meet demands of the population within 10 years. Exactly who it is that won the Second Battle of Hoover Dam in 2282 isn't known, but later that year, or early the next year, Shady Sands was nuked. This is of course going with the information released post-show, as initially Shady Sands was nuked in 2277. Despite its wide span and a population in the hundreds of thousands, the NCR seems to have disappeared from the LA area at the very least as of 2297, aside from Moldaver's forces in the Griffith Observatory. As of 2297, that outpost has been destroyed as well. I do need to note that we may be looking at the full destruction of the NCR, not just Shady Sands. In episode 5, Maximus talks about the bombs falling when he was a kid. Bombs plural. Aside from that, in the aftermath of the Vault 4 controversy, Todd Howard said, quote, "The bombs fall just after the events of New Vegas," end quote. We only see a single crater at Shady Sands, so are we to assume that the other settlements were nuked as well? It would explain why we don't see more of the NCR. Okay, that covers everything we learned. Let's cover one last thing, what I'm hoping to see in Season 2. Let's start this with characters, going alphabetically by first name. I want to see Arthur Maxon make an appearance. Whether he forms a major character in Season 2 or not, I don't know. I want to see how Barb Howard learns that her husband has discovered her true nature and how she reacts to it. I also want to know where she is. I'd also like to know if seeing the world she wanted to create gives her any regrets, or if she stands by her actions. I want to see how Betty Pearson deals with Norm being in Vault 31, and how the Vault deals with a broken water chip. I want an explanation as to how Bud Askins has done such a bad job as Brain on Aroomba. I want to know if Cooper Howard confronts Barb, or if she confronts him. Does he resign from Vault-Tec spokesman, or is he fired? What drives his identification as a communist? I want to see his downfall and how he became a ghoul. As for the ghoul he becomes, I want to see him fight a Deathclaw, and I want to see him find his family. When it comes to Chet, I want him to have a last name. I want to see what his life is like in Vault 32 as the partner to Stephanie and the stepfather to her child. Does he pick up the old investigation when he becomes part of Vault 32? I want CX-404 to survive. I'd like to see what the relationship between Dane and Maximus is after Maximus is presumably promoted to Knight. I want to know if Davey really voted for Betty. I'm joking. I don't have anything specific I want to see from Davey other than I want to see more of him because he's hilarious. I want to see what, if anything, Janie Howard learns about the rift that tears her mother and father apart, and how her father got her to safety. I want to see how the loss of Lucy's foundation has affected her view of the world, and what she does if she gets to confront her father again. I want to know Maximus's real name. Elder Cleric Quintus says that they gave him a name, but what was his name before that? Also, if he's been made a knight, how he deals with his new position. I want to see how Lee Moldaver / Miss Williams survived the war. I've seen speculation that she stayed in the cryo suite in Vegas as depicted in the credits of episode 8, but that's not been confirmed. Which of her names is real? Why is she called the Flame Mother? Who was she in the NCR? Who was she in Shady Sands? I want to see how Norm deals with the situation in Vault 31. Does he get frozen or find a way out? I want to see Raul Tejada make an appearance. Come on, get Danny Trejo on the show in ghoul makeup. Speaking of Danny Trejo, I'd love a cameo from Tony Shalhoub, the actor who voiced Aradesh in the first Fallout. Obviously, Aradesh is dead, but just having him as a character would be great. I also wouldn't mind seeing Keith Sarabaika covered in bandages as the burned man in retirement. I want to see how Reg McFeed handles things in Vault 33 without his friend and council co-worker Woody. If Robert House is in the show, and I assume he is, he'd better be so gross he's hard to look at. I'd like a better understanding of Rose McClane's relationship with Moldaver. I want to see if Elder Cleric Quintus creates his new brotherhood. Also, I want to see how he treats Maximus's victory. I'd like to see more of how Dr. Siggy Wilzig grew disenchanted with the Enclave. Also, it'd be great to know how he knew of Moldaver and how he contacted her. I just hope that the snake oil salesman makes another appearance. I want to see how Stephanie Harper handles running Vault 32. In terms of Thaddeus, I want to know what he becomes, whether a ghoul or super mutant. Lastly, I'd like to see how Woody handles life in Vault 32 as a former member of the 33 Council. Does he run against Stephanie Harper in the race to become Overseer? In terms of organizations, again alphabetically, in the Brotherhood of Steel, I want to see a schism between Quintus and Arthur. I'd also like to know if my speculation that Arthur is becoming King Arthur is accurate. As for the Enclave, I want to see a lot more of them, as they barely made an appearance in Season 1. I want to know if the Legion still exists, and if so, who's in charge. I want to see if parts of the New California Republic have survived outside the LA basin. When it comes to Vault-Tec, I want to see where Barb Howard is held up, who the CEO is, or whoever it was that was talking to her in that meeting, and if they managed to drop the bombs, or if, as I suspect, they were beaten to the punch by the Chinese. 2 more points. First, in terms of the Mojave, I want to know the canonical outcome to Fallout New Vegas. Also, it's only been 15 years. A lot of characters from the game should still be alive. Lastly, in terms of tech, I'd like to see more robots. We saw Mr. Handies in action, but I'd love to see Protectrons, Assaultrons, iBots, Sentrybots, and Securitrons. I also want to see some energy weapons in action. I'd like to see some knights wielding heavy weapons, miniguns, Gatling lasers, etc. We saw them using miniguns and vertibirds, but not holding them as they fought. Alright, that should do it for my coverage of Fallout Season 1. It's back to regular lore videos for me now. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, Ahotep, Despy, Electric Head, Hero Cunning, Laced Cake, E, and NB Mole Miner for their support. I also want to specifically thank Dark Malcontent for helping with this video script. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.